Hello and welcome. It's David, just David this week. Brent is planting corn this week in western Nebraska. Got a storm coming and doesn't have good cell service. So I'm just going to do a quick recap of the things that we've been thinking about, we've been emailing about this week, and what's the latest in the AEI premium site and the forecast network itself. So the first thing to cover, we have had a couple questions about what's going to happen in the US economy, specifically GDP. We had a question about 1/4 of GDP decline, and we had a second question about the possibility of 2 quarters in 2020 posting negative GDP declines. Well, this week, the US Bureau of Economic Analysis came out with the Q1 estimate, negative 4.3%. So that resolves that question. I checked my score earlier, and I thought I had a pretty good forecast. I was 80 or 90% chance of this occurring, but my rank came in at the 27th percentile, which means my forecast might have been good, but it wasn't as good as everyone else's. And so about 80% of the rest of you out there had even more aggressive forecasts. So hats off to you. Also, you probably need to update that the second question, a question about 2 quarters of 2020 GDP being negative GDP, because we've just cleared one off. So there's, the probability of a second one just got a little bit easier here. Another thing to keep in mind is what's going on with the U.S. economy. And we've had a lot of discussion about ethanol, U.S. gasoline consumption. Is there going to be a quick recovery? This week, I did a interesting look at gasoline consumption. There's a big article about that. It's been really interesting to look at that data. A lot of surprising facts. Um, you know, Gasoline consumption in the last few weeks of data um, is 16% less than the lowest that we've had in 30 years of data. So you got to go back to 1994 when we had about 6 million barrels of gasoline supplied per day, and we've currently been around 5 million barrels per day supplied. So much below even the historic 30 years. So we had 30 years of growth, and we're still way below that. In fact, I also looked at sort of cumulative year-to-date progress, and we're at about 90%. So even if the economy recovers to 100%, we continue to move forward, we're at 90% of the 5-year average consumption. And it's just pretty rare for us to have any decline that's more than, any year to be 97% or less the previous year. And so usually we're used to 3% declines. Right now we're at a 10% decline for the whole year. So we got 2 questions about that. The first one is 2 new questions, so go check those out. The first one is, what's the probability of U.S. gasoline consumption on a weekly basis exceeding 9 million barrels per day between May and August? And, that's an important number because we are right. It's pretty rare for us to ever slip below 9 million barrels over the last 5 years. We've done it 3 times out of 90 weeks. So it's pretty rare that we get below 9 million barrels per day. The other question is, what's the probability of the U.S. getting above 10 million barrels per day? And we've never done that. So if you're thinking there's a possibility of a sharp uptick, the idea that cheap oil is going to send a lot of people and abated concerns about the corona will send people driving on summer vacations, you're going to want to keep an eye on that question as well. So when do we recover to that 9 million threshold, and will we exceed a 10 million threshold? So again, check out the article, a lot of information in there for you to think about. Of course, Brent wrote an article last week about models and the models that we use in our decision making, and should they come with a warning label. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, really spend some time looking at that. He's outlined 10 really good issues that you have to think about when you're considering how you take the output of a model and extrapolate that into the decision making, because these models are really helpful, but they're not complete. I read that article, I was reminded of the quote that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And so we always have to be thinking about the model and how it might be useful in the decision making process that we're going to play out. And one of the points Brent really laid out well is that a lot of these models, especially these epidemiological models that are in the news all the time now, are rely on some assumptions of human behavior, and human behavior ultimately impacts the outcome. And so that's a huge source of error. And it's really hard to forecast the weather. Ben Bernanke's got a good quote about it's hard to forecast the weather, which is particles, physical particles interacting with each other. But now the human side of this is the particles are anticipating what the other particles are going to be doing, and that's just really hard. And so take a good read at that. Another article that I took a look at, we had a few weeks ago, we wrote an article about the 5 macroeconomic trends for the farm economy to be looking at. And a reader, John from Texas, reached out and said, I think you missed one, talked about unemployment. And initially I was like, yeah, it's hard to make a list of 3 to 5 things and not get everything. But in the exchange I had with him, which was really valuable and appreciated that, he got me thinking about on-farm income versus off-farm income. And really, if we think about the challenges that the farm economy's had over the last 5 years, it's a lack of on-farm income. And we've written a lot of posts in the past that kind of started to weave some of the thinking together as I was emailing with John. And so I wrote an article. It's a bit long. It's about 1,200 words. Got a lot of graphs in it. So you're going to want to, I think it's worth your time to read, but it's a little longer than what we usually like to do. But it's really something to think about. So I'll set the stage. One, we got to think about the demographics. So a lot of producers rely on farm income for majority of their household income. So the way the USDA looks at this is there's off-farm income and there's on-farm income, and you add those together, and that's household income, farm household income. And of course, that income is what we use to make family living expenses and also service any debt that we have on the operation. So about 90% of farms, the 2 million farms the USDA tracks, about 90% of them are very reliant on off-farm income. Now, back in the Great Recession, off-farm income slid in the U.S. by about 10%, and it took about 5 years to recover. Now, it's worth noting that the unemployment rates that we're sort of anticipating as a result of unemployment claims are well above where we were back in 2008 and 2009 during the Great Recession. And then the last point we make in this article, I outline this article, is where farm loan delinquencies went in 2009. And there was a really sharp uptick in farm loan delinquencies. It was a quick uptick, and then it worked its way lower. And it's hard to really understand that uptick as it relates to on-farm income versus off-farm income. But I think what's really important to look at is what happened in the past and how that off-farm income shock back in 2008 and 2009 impacted farm loan delinquencies, or was a part of a scenario that led to on-farm or farm loan delinquencies. And then we also think about where we are today with the off-farm income potentially looking bleak for some individuals, but also the on-farm component when we think about the commodity price environment. So the title that I put is "Brace for an Off-Farm Income Hit" in the farm economy. But the COVID thing is impacting both of these elements of household income: the on-farm element with lower commodity prices, and in some cases the off-farm income, as we think about unemployment rates and some of the challenges that individual farms and operators might be thinking about. So that's another article for you to spend some time in taking a look at. Things that we're going to keep in mind moving ahead, of course, take a look for an early WASDE report. The WASDE report will be coming out here shortly. I forget the exact date. I'm going to look it up for you. But it's going to plug in those early yield estimates and those big acreage estimates. So we're going to keep an eye on that. We'll see how that plays out. Its date is May the 12th, so we have another week for that WASDE report. But go update your expectations of those yield forecasts. We're going to write an article about planting progress and historic planting progress. It seems like there's been a lot of progress, so we'll see as those reports start to come out and expectations about the U.S. crop yield start to come in. Keep in mind, we're transitioning into this growing season. Growing season will be a big part of the conversation moving forward. Other than that, that's all I have for you this week. Stay healthy, stay safe. Thanks for checking in, and don't hesitate to reach out with any questions or ideas you have. Thanks so much.